Hey guys, you hear that? I think Mom's ringing the dinner bell to tell us to come to the dinner table. Ugh, what has she cooked up again this time? Burnt salmon, over steamed broccoli, overcooked rice. How do you overcook rice? I mean, come on. How do you burn rice? That seems like one of those things you just get a rice cooker and you end up burning it. That's terrible. But let me tell you something that Mama cooked up tonight that's going to be real good, and it's something from Blue Apron. I don't know what it is from Blue Apron because she has so many selections that she can choose from on BlueApron.com that it's really hard to just know what she's going to pick to cook. But Mama's cooking is going to change with Blue Apron. Let me tell you a little bit about Blue Apron. They deliver the contents to your front porch, and it sits there for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. I don't know, maybe you were out of town in Europe having good food with Anthony Bourdain. But don't worry, that food's not going to get rancid because there's ice packs in it. Ice packs in the food that stays cool on your porch while you're in Europe having dinner with Anthony Bourdain. You get back, you unpack the box, you put all the food in the refrigerator. It comes with detailed instructions. You get multiple meals in there. And then all you got to do is just cook it up. Get some oils, get some spices, get some, pots and pans, but that's about it. That's all you need. And then everything else is provided with Blue Apron. Bernie Lou, if you're out there listening right now, I want you to get some Blue Apron. It'll teach you how to cook because I don't know why I'm coming after your cooking skills, but just get Blue Apron, Bernie. Mama's cooking's going to change because of Blue Apron. And let me tell you, your cooking's going to change because of Blue Apron. Are you a college kid that just doesn't have time to cook? Or maybe you have time to cook, but you just cook terribly? Blue Apron. Are you a mom that wants to have good home-cooked meals, but you've never learned cooking skills? Blue Apron. Are you a dad with terrible cooking skills? Blue Apron. Are you just a person, a human on this planet with terrible cooking skills? Blue Apron. Not only do you get delicious meals, but you also learn how to cook. Bob has talked about using this product a lot. Brian, I know, doesn't use this product because I went over to his house and his risotto was burnt. So talk to him about his burnt risotto next time you see Brian. But let me tell you, Blue Apron is the way to go. So if you go to our website or check the link in the iTunes description, you'll notice that there are $30 off your first meal order. $30 off. Again, that's, what can I buy with $30? I'm not going to list it all out because it's a lot. One thing I'm looking at is a microwave. I could probably buy a microwave for $30. I could probably buy some pots and pans for $30. So actually, all the cookware that you would need for Blue Apron and these delicious meals, you could buy with the $30 you're going to save. And also, that money goes to Entitled to My Friend's Opinion. So if you want to support the show and eat healthy and eat delicious, go to blueapron.com. Use the link in our website or in the podcast description because that way we get the money. But help support the show and help eat deliciously. Blueapron.com. You won't be disappointed. Welcome back. This is another episode of Entitled to My Friend's Opinion. In case you forgot, I know the name is sometimes hard to remember, and you are part of the Entitled family in case you forgot that too. I'm your host, Josh, and host Bob is here as well.
Hey.
But host Brian is setting up his curriculum for the school year, so I assume he's only going to teach children how to be entitled family followers, really the best. So we'll be having boatloads of young children propagandized with entitled opinions pretty soon here, which is exciting. And pretty soon your class will be propagandized with the entitled opinions.
Of course, I have to do that. It's my obligation. I'm not actually going to do that, just to clarify.
Are you going to be the
job.
douchey teacher that says to everyone you have a podcast?
I think I was going to let that one slide a little bit because I didn't really, I don't think I want my students listening to it the first month or so, you know what I mean?
Yes, I guess that's very true. Well, before we get in, I do like to talk about the stats sometimes here on the podcast, which we haven't done in a while. But August has been our biggest month so far. The Bob Your podcast with Brandon about him leaving the Mormon church was the best received one we've had so far. I mean, that was a really incredible episode.
Thank you.
Picked up a lot of listeners from that. And then we also picked up some Brazilian listeners, so maybe, because that's a big place where Mormons like to take their mission trips.
Well, that's where Brandon took his trip, so that would make sense.
Yeah. I do want to give a shout out to a place that has not gotten a shout out before, Australia. They have had so many plays in July and August. It's been pretty unbelievable. They're in a solid fourth place, so they're off the podium. It's USA, Japan a solid silver, Germany solid gold, bronze, but then Australia's coming in strong at fourth with really, anyone could be fighting for that fifth spot. So thank you to the Australian listeners. Please reach out to us on social media. We want to know who you are. We want to engage. Yesterday, we were putting out a campaign to run a kind of a listener-run episode in the future where it's going to be all questions from the listeners, anything you want to talk about. Well, anything with an asterisk, but on this podcast, we go on a lot of random rabbit holes. So whatever you guys like, definitely look for that in the future. And thank you guys so much. We keep growing and growing and growing. And for only 36 episodes out there, this is 37. We are so excited to see what's going to happen in the future.
Ditto.
Ditto from Bob. All right. Yes, well said, Josh. Well said. Well, let's get started. So I think the first thing that we're going to get into, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because it's been in the national spotlight, but we kind of felt like we should just touch on it a little bit. And that is the events that transpired in Charlottesville last weekend, which would have been August 12th and 11th and 12th. So that's Saturday. I might be wrong on that. My dates are really bad. I thank the Romans for calendars because I have trouble tracking dates. But
yeah, 11th and 12th.
The events that happened, I don't need to go into a lot of detail about them because I think at this point everyone knows a lot about them. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on what you think, kind of your initial reaction to what happened in just Charlottesville. I know is a lot of emotion, and I've spent a lot of this week, and I've actually listened to 2 interviews, both with people from both sides of the aisle who were at the event, prominent names. One is Christopher Cantwell, who you probably, if you have followed it all, is kind of well known as being the leader of the alt-right and the neo-Nazis, if you will, that were there on the protest. And then I've listened to a few interviews with people from Antifa and the left who were there as well. But Bob, I want to get your initial reaction and just kind of some of your thoughts after the emotions died down.
Yeah, I guess the initial reaction is just fuck. I mean, it's hard to take the emotions out of the whole situation. And me and Josh kind of agreed that we don't want to talk about it for too long because I think that this is rightly so been a topic that's been really beaten to death. But I think it's important. I shared that on the Entitled Facebook page. I shared an HBO clip that interviewed with some of the alt-right neo-Nazi individuals. I think it's important that people see that because it's funny. This brings up the issue. Like we're really quick to call people Nazis. So like when I first hear that, I'm like, well, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about someone that, offended someone with some slight microaggression, or are we talking about full-on Nazis? Well, it's clear when you watch the video. Nazis is like the only word you can think of, right? These people are like blatantly racist, and you can see how sold they are on that ideological viewpoint that in their perspective that America is this place getting taken over, because they think that it's really white supremacist, which is just kind of sickening to watch. And really, as a person who grows up, I think that most of our viewers are probably similar in a probably likely urban environment, a college environment. It can be easy to forget that those people exist. So I think first off, that just knowing that racism is real is pretty haunting. And then, of course, you have the violence that's added to it. You see this like useless violence of someone running into someone with a car, and it's just like, I mean, it's bastardly to me that someone thinks that something like that is American. That these people think that they're doing things that are American. That supporting the land that their forefathers gained is American. I mean, that's not the history of America. The history of America is immigration. The history of America is people coming from other places and making it their own for everyone. When they say things like that, it's to me inherently un-American. So it's sad to see. We talked about this the other day in our what was that, episode 36 maybe? No, episode maybe 34. Yeah, of like what does it mean to be American, and you really start seeing like, oh, this is what they think. that's to me something that we can't label that as American at all. That is the exact opposite of American.
And I would actually, if you're interested, go back and reference episode 34, Mini Americas, because that was one of the best episodes I think we've had that's been just the three of us. And I think really this just shows that we live in a society where these two political ideologies cannot work together. We have to have some sort of secession. And I think we talked about that in episode number 34. I still believe it to be true. I think it's even more true after this weekend. One of the things that I think we need to take a look at, though, is the types of people that were out in Charlottesville last weekend. Mm-hmm. And it was two types of people. And it was the Nazis who think anyone that is left of National Socialism is a communist.
Yeah.
And it was these anti-fascists who think anyone left of purely straight communism is a Nazi. And they were going to, and they literally went to war with each other. I mean, I'm surprised only one person got killed, especially considering how much ammunition and guns and, artillery that the neo-Nazis were carrying. I mean, really props. I don't want to say this, but thank you to the people on the right and the neo-Nazis who were carrying all those ammunition and all those arms, that only one person ended up dead, because this could have been a lot worse than it actually was. But I think we got to remember that this is also one of those situations that I think the media makes it seem like it's a lot worse than it actually is. They think how deep-seated it is. They show these pictures of the neo-Nazis, and these people are absolutely Nazis, but it was only, 400, 500 of these actual true Nazis. I don't know how many are out there in America. The last census count of the KKK was less than 10,000 members. It's not a very big group. Now, if it's rising, it's not, then it's rising, but it's still a very small number. But I think the media likes to portray everybody on the right as kind of this alt-right neo-Nazi, and this was just another event to continue to perpetuate that. But I also think we need to take a look. You can go ahead.
I think that's a dangerous thing to say. Like the people there were clearly of that realm. If you look at interviews of them, they clearly think that they're starting a movement, that they're waking people up. If you look at the video I shared, there's clear statements of further violence. That this isn't the end. There's much more violence to come. I think that they're fair to have portrayed those people that were there as Nazis, as evil, we're not seeing Hitler evil yet, because there's no genocide, but we're still seeing like the start of that, and I think that shouldn't be written off as the media over portraying it. Now, I do think there's danger to say everyone that voted for Donald Trump is aligned with those people. But I mean, that does give us to a whole other issue, is like, why is Donald Trump not disjoining himself from those individuals? That is concerning, and I think that's fair that people on the left are saying. But I think that, like what you said, it can be dangerous to put everyone into that perspective. But these people that were there and doing these rallies and defending the statue of Robert E. Lee, the loser of the Confederate War, of the Civil War, I think there's no defense for those people that were there. But I do agree with you that we can't take those people that were there and then associate them with everyone, that voted for Trump, or everyone that's right of center. I think that another thing that was kind of concerning about this is like I saw someone who shared something that was like, and we talk about a lot, is finding that middle ground, but it was a really classic. It was a Nazi on one side, and then like a Black Lives Matter movement person on the other side, and it's just like help them find the middle. Well, there's really like, is that even possible between those two such different ideologies? I mean, an optimist might say yes, but I mean, can discussion even occur between those two groups? I think we're starting to see that you have to be a big optimist to start thinking that that's probably true.
Well, I think too, we need to remember that if we want to be in a middle ground, we need to judge each side accordingly. And when you look on the Nazi side, I don't know how anyone could have that much hate in their heart for someone. I just, like, it's almost uncomprehendable to me to be able to see what those people were doing, and I would never see myself in that situation. But I also need to take a look at the people on the left as well and take a look at their blatant anti-white racism as well. I mean, that's something that can't be
Wait,
disregarded
whoa.
either.
What are you
So it's
talking? What do you mean blatant anti-white racism? Where is that occurring?
well, that on the rhetoric of the far left of that the white man, you talked about the Lena Dunham had the white male genocide video that she posted and things like that. The attacks on the white male it's happening to that class of the neo-Nazis as well. I'm going to judge that the same way I'm going to judge the neo-Nazis saying that we need to get rid of all the black people.
I don't see anyone going out there saying we need to get rid of all the white people. That there needs to be we need to regain the land and take it away from white individuals. I just don't see that as being present or equal. I mean, yes, there are people that want to put advantage. I mean, the left is such a big place, and there are radicals on the left that do speak of things that are like, we have to take the power away and give the power to minorities so that they can have it, rather than, let's all become equal again. I think that there's danger in that, rather than like that. I think that we should be going towards a society that is, equal and equitable, so that everyone has a fair chance. But I don't see anyone attacking the white male. I like what I guess give me a clear example of an attack.
Lena Dunham, she posted a video on Twitter. This was 6 months ago. This is the first kind of initial like big thing that people might know that would come to mind. But she basically talked about, like literally had videos of white men getting killed, and it was a cartoon video, and just talking about how much better life would be without the white male. And those are, I mean, I'm kind of surprised that, you haven't heard this kind of rhetoric from people before.
No, I'm not saying that I've not heard rhetoric. I think that it's just misguided to call it that. I think that it's not I mean, I think this is the tendency of the right, and it's what fuels them, and it's kind of disastrous. Is to start viewing it as an attack on themselves. Like I said, I think that there's definitely rhetoric that says like we need to take power away, and I think there are people that might take it too far. I'm not familiar with that video, although I'm sure I would not agree with what it says. But I really like it's hard for me to compare like a video like that to years and systems of oppression that are real, to laws that exist, to literal systems that we've had, especially in the South. It's hard for me to compare that, and then for me to be like, well, now we need to sympathize. I think that so many people are upset with Donald Trump because he said there's wrongs on both sides. And that was a really bad thing to say. I think that I totally disagree. I mean, yes, it's not that the left is probably not making it better. Their rhetoric is probably not helping the situation. I think that you brought it up earlier, I think off the podcast, that like there's not that many people who are trying to calm the situation. There's a lot of fuel to the flame, but I think it's dangerous to compare those things. It's kind of like apples and oranges to me, or apples and like pineapples.
Well, and I think the scary part is that the scary part to me is that no political leader on either side, though, is coming out and condemning, or at least trying to calm down their own party. I think that that's something that we really need to be wary of. I think that this, is that's something that needs to be addressed from party leaders, is to say, stop this, because all of a sudden we found ourselves in an America where, politics dominates the daily discussion. It's kind of sad, but it's true. And I don't know how we're going to stop that, because I don't think politics needs to dominate people's daily lives like this.
No, and I think...
and obviously...
No, I was going to say, I think we've gotten to the point where there is no discussion. There's to reference that video again, there's a really huge moment where a man's standing at the podium saying like, we need to have a discussion, and he just gets booed and like pushed off. And I think we are definitely in a place, I would never tell someone to not go to a rally because there's racists out there like trying to doing what they're doing. Like when these racists are walking, I'm not going to tell anyone like, no, don't go walk against them. But yeah, no, I agree with you. Like both sides need to we need to come back. We can't be having these types of situations if we want to deal with it. Now, that's like a perfect solution. I don't know how that happens, but we definitely both agree. Like this is just not accomplishing anything.
But do you think we're beyond the point of accomplishing anything? Is this the first? Is this the straw that broke the camel's back, or the first warning sign? Is this the canary in the coal mine? Do you think?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question. I would say before I saw the actual footage of these people, I would have answered with a more optimistic view. But you really do see like the ideologies that exist in this country that are like so inherently racist, so inherently anti-Semitic. Is that anti-Semitist? Is that how I would say that?
Anti-Semitic.
Semitic. Thank you. The anti-Semitic. I can't foresee those minds changing, especially not with that. I could see us changing them, over time, generationally. But like, I don't know. It's scary to think. So I mean, and I think that's what I want to talk about for the rest of the time is kind of why that is, why it is that we're in such a different place. And we kind of said we don't want to sit too much on Charlottesville because it's one of those things that there's just so much to be said. There's so much that can't be simplified. And I think we're gonna like. I'd like if with your permission, Josh, to turn a little bit to some philosophical questions about communication. Why is it that humans have such difficult communication between each other? And how I wanted to do that was with a few thought experiments, if that's all right with you.
Yes, please go into that. I don't really want to talk about Charlottesville anymore.
Yeah, no, this is draining.
We could not stop talking about it if we wanted to.
I know.
Yeah.
It really is. It's both emotionally and physically draining to talk about. And I'm sitting in my bed. I don't have any furniture in my apartment. Like we have literally no furniture. So I'm sitting on my bed right now, which honestly super comfortable. I was worried about falling asleep. Just falling asleep if we get too comfortable. So okay. So I wanted to start off first. I think we'll probably only get through a couple of these thought experiments. Now, like, I guess I could talk a little bit about the purpose of thought experiments. I'm no expert. I'm not a philosophy major, but it's something that I enjoy reading about. Thought experiments are basically, they were invented way, 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 way back in the day. We're talking ancient Greece, and actually most commonly were used to solve questions of physics, questions of math, but also got turned into asking questions of philosophy. And it's really just setting up situations that are very dictated, these experimental conditions that the thinker has to dwell on, and then they come to the conclusion about it. So if it was a math problem, you can come to the conclusion of the answer for that math problem even without going out and doing the actual experiment. The classic one is I want to say Galileo, but that's not right. Who discovered gravity?
Newton. Isaac Newton. Apple fall on his head.
And he also talked about how two objects will fall at the same rate. Well, actually, instead of there's always the reference of going to the Tower of Pisa and dropping two things. Well, he actually talked about that with a thought experiment. So he said if you get one rock that's just a massive boulder and a smaller rock, and say the massive boulder falls at a rate 4 times as fast as the smaller rock, right? So the big rock will fall 4 times as fast as a smaller one. Well, if you combined those two, then because the smaller one falls at a slower rate, you would average the two rates of falling, and then it would actually fall at a slower rate than if they were separated, which makes no sense because it increased in mass. And so that was the thought experiment that he used to prove that two objects fall at the same time. So that was the whole, getting that out of the way in case anyone's never heard of a thought experiment, not to insult anyone's intelligence. But the one that I really want to talk about first, and it's going to seem a little bit off the beaten path, but then it'll bring back, I swear. And this is the Beetle in a box, and it was done by Wittgenstein. My friend Jack actually introduced this to me the other day. And so it basically goes like this. So say everyone in the world lived in a community where when you were born, you were given a box. And inside that box was a beetle. Now, so everyone's going around with their own beetle. Now, the only rule is you can look inside your box and look at your beetle all you want. And you can talk about your beetle all you want, but you are not ever allowed to look inside someone else's box. So you're never allowed to see what someone else's beetle looks like. Does that make sense? So if it's me and Josh, I have my own personal beetle that I look at every day. And then Josh, you have your own beetle that you look like every day. Now, I guess the question to you is, how do we know that those beetles are the same, that they look the same, that we're talking about the same thing?
Well, to open that up, I think human trust is the only answer you could go for to saying that the Beatles look the same, because I could tell you that mine is blue and yellow and covered in, bright orange spots, and you'd have to believe me because you never saw that Beetle before. You'd have to believe my word. You'd say, okay, this guy's looked at the Beetle a bunch. He's seen the Beetle a ton of times. He probably knows the right thing about the Beetle, so you have to inherently think that the person is telling the truth to you. Or you could live in a completely different mindset of that the person is inherently telling you a lie and that every other beetle looks the same as your beetle.
Right. And so you kind of outlined that pretty perfectly, right? Like, no matter what, you're taking a leap of faith. You can choose to be an optimist or if it's a choice or not. If me and Josh are talking about this beetle, now not seeing each other's beetles does not impede on our ability to converse about the beetle, right? Me and you could have hours and hours of conversation about beetles, which is weird, but as you can see, this is a metaphor for a lot of other things. But you and me could sit at dinner and be like, well, my beetles are so important to me because beetles do this, and then you can talk about beetles, and we're still talking about what we assume is the same thing, but as you can see here, they can be very, very, very different. Your beetle could really be a phone and my beetle could be a laptop, right? But to both of us, we're looking at beetles. Another way that this one is commonly done is this experiment's commonly done is like if Josh, if you were born and as soon as you were born, you were given glasses that changed all of the colors. They made them the opposite color. So when you looked at green, you saw blue. Well, as I taught you, as your father in this weird situation, as I taught you what blue is, you would be seeing green, right? So, but to you, there'd be no difference. You would see green, but you would say blue, and we would both know none the better, right? But we're both seeing it in different ways. Well, what Wittgenstein is getting at here, and what's really interesting to think about is like this is the limitation of language, right? There's because language to him is just. All it is trying to paint a picture for someone else of what you understand. But there's the limitation of they'll never really be able to understand this. We're making, and we have to make assumptions about this. That like another way that language is so limiting. And I'm sure, Josh, you've experienced this so many times, is like if someone says something to you and they say like, I love going to the park. Well, then I can take that as, okay, he loves going to the park. Or you could be like, well, why do you say love? And you can start reading into my experiences and creating this whole experience. So it's this weird limitation of humans to not really be able to explain to each other their experiences. So it brings up the question, can we really ever understand each other's experience, how we take in the world?
This is actually something that I've been recently thinking about, surprisingly enough. And no, I'm not just bluffing that to answer this question. I was actually thinking about this last night. But think about how many people have been in human history. Let's just say 15 billion. I don't know if that's close. That seems like a good estimate of
we'll go with that.
The course of human history.
Trillion.
15 billion. So there's
I think trillion because there's like 3 trillion right now.
There's 7 billion people on Earth.
Oh, well, Bob needs to learn facts. Where's Morocco?
If any of you are math wizards out there, I would love to see what an economy with 3 trillion people looks like. Jot down those numbers and give them to Bob. But so we'll say there's been 15 billion people throughout the course of human history. And just so much, and I talked about this with on my podcast with Grant Mayfield, episode number 36, and I talked about how, think about your siblings or your parents. These are people that, if you grew up in a traditional household, you lived with for 18 years of your life. You know these people better than anyone on the face of the earth. And yet the way my sister perceives the world and the way I perceive the world could not be any more different.
Right.
And you would think that someone raised in a very, similar environment under two parents who are essentially, I would say, trying to raise the children in similar ways, and yet they come out so completely different. I mean, that right there is just proof that we can't ever have a similar human experience. Every human's experience is going to be completely different. And I think that that is essentially why we find ourselves with these in-group preferences and why we find ourselves wanting to be tribalistic, is because you want people who've shared in the same experiences you have so that you have something to relate to them with. I mean, you think about your kind of a blank canvas as a human. Everything you learn and everything you go through up to this point, all 22 years of my life, are based on every single experience I've had. And, let's say, hey, I didn't get sick, I'd be in a completely different place, probably wouldn't have this podcast, and my experience with the world would be completely different than it is today. But like, think about that on your end, Bob. Had I not gotten sick and the podcast hadn't happened, then think about all the things that wouldn't have happened for you. So now your experience would have completely changed had I not gotten sick. I mean, that's pretty crazy to think about, but no, we can never ever, I think, understand another person's experience.
No, and what's you brought up the question of tribalism too, like the fact that so much of the experience is, like I said, is just painting pictures. That's what we do when we speak. And I think that we've all met people that we get really along with, and it seems like we're on the same page right away. And like, think about all the people that you probably see eye to eye with, or you have a similar take on the world. Because like, I agree with you, Josh. I don't think anyone's ever going to know your experience. I think that we're all definitely individuals. We're all definitely having the same, much different takes of the world, which is something we can come back to a little bit later. But think about how many people you probably didn't get along with just because you used a different word to say the same thing. And something that Wittenberg and philosophy does really well too is, like, they created a lot of our words that are kind of just describe things that we can't really understand. Like, one of the classic ones is angst. Angst was a word that was created in, like, I believe the 19th century to just kind of describe that this feeling that like is kind of indescribable in a lot of ways, and it bought on to a lot of things. But say, like, my definition of angst is different than Josh's, well then say he uses a different word to describe that feeling. Well, we could think that we're disagreeing, but in reality we both have the same idea, we have both the same comment because of this limitation of language. We think that we're enemies. We think that we're against each other.
Bob, I can distinctly remember having arguments with you just because of how we define a word.
Right.
That's, even like, I talked about this with Grant Mayfield, episode number 36, if you want to go back and reference it out there for the Entitled family. But we talked about even like the word diversity and how many different definitions that has, and almost the word diversity can have a different definition to each person. So then this kind of brings me to my next question, which is a kind of a comment question, but it's pretty amazing that we get along with other people at all.
Right.
I mean, you think about it, and like, you're one of my best friends on earth, and yet compared to other people, we have a lot less in common than some other people. So it's almost really surprising that, like, you and I became friends even with this little amount of stuff in common. So there's got to be something beyond just commonalities that bring people together.
Yeah, there has to be. There has to be some sort of inherent thing. Like I was asking my friend the other day, like, how similar do you think everyone's consciousness is? I mean, if you think about it, we're all very unique people. We're all a combination of different experiences, and but for some reason, there are things that just speak to each other. There's just like, oh, we're on a similar wavelength. So it makes me always wonder, like, how different is my consciousness from your consciousness? Like, literally how different are our minds creating thoughts, but clearly there are ways that create similar thoughts more than others.
I mean, like, even I had a friend over the other night, and we were just kind of, shooting shit, talking life. And it was surprising because I just realized how fundamentally different I see the world than him. And Brian's even brought that up on the podcast, I think, when we've talked about just like how fundamentally different Brian and I see the world, and that every single thought that Brian forms and every single thought that I form, given the same exact, like, think about reading the same exact set of facts and statements and how differently our thoughts would be formed because of our previous experiences, depending on where we are in the world. I mean, that would be a great experiment to run with just people along every socioeconomic class, with almost every category you could do. You just give them one paragraph and you see how they interpret that paragraph, because I don't think you would get a single similar interpretation. So it is really surprising that obviously it's in humans' best interests to get along with each other, because there's really no reason we should get along with each other.
Right. And I think that one of the quotes that I thought was really cool from Wittgenstein was that language is a public tool for the understanding of a private life. It's really interesting that we have this like universal tool that we've agreed upon. But if you really think about it, like language is really the most useful for understanding yourself. Like when you read that paragraph, like that you're proposing, like I'm gonna have a really great understanding of it for myself, but that doesn't help me understand what you're thinking about it. Like it's this interesting thing that we have this public tool of language, but really it only serves like this private purpose. And if like I think that like bringing this back to what we talked about with Charlottesville, like this is something that like a classic example that I always bring up is like Nazi. Like what is the definition of being a Nazi? You know, I said it earlier, like we have the tendency nowadays to throw that out so quickly that, someone with a microaggression, well, you're like an alt-right Nazi. But then we see someone today or this past weekend in Charlottesville where I'm like, that's clearly a Nazi, like, so then what does that do to your other definition? Like we can't use this word to mean the same thing. We can't just have all these pseudo definitions of these words. It's so limiting, and it's only going to create more contention between people because, I mean, clearly those aren't the same things.
And this always brings me back to the story of the Tower of Babel in the Bible, and whether you're religious or not, the Bible is actually just a pretty interesting book.
Yeah.
And the story of Tower of Babel is that that people thought they were going to build a tower to the heavens to be God, and God kind of smited them and made them all speak different languages. And so, just even that amount of like, all of a sudden now the whole world has a completely different language. And then you take a look, the subsets within that language. I mean, I love watching swamp people on Discovery Channel because they have to use, subtitles for someone who's speaking English. Right. And, you talk about the dialect of each region of the country. I mean, someone's accent, it's just, words are very limiting. I mean, I think that's why they say 95% of human communication is nonverbal, and it is so true, but words are the thing that do the most damage and the most good. And so maybe we need to have a verbal renaissance of sorts.
Yeah, I think there definitely, I mean, I've said this before, I think that there definitely needs to be more clear words. Wittgenstein kind of took, at the end of his life, took the idea that that's impossible. He kind of set out to do that and ended up, he has a famous quote, I forgot what it was though, I literally read it today, that he basically was like, this is impossible, you should just deal with yourself on an interpersonal level, or I guess intrapersonal. I never get those right. But I want to turn to a second thought experiment that will connect this. I think will really connect to Charlottesville really well if I can do that. And this one is pretty famous. It's called Mary's Room. And so I'll paint the picture of Mary's room. So imagine there's this brilliant scientist, and her name is Mary, and she's placed in a room that's completely black and white. And she's only given a computer that sees completely in black and white. So all of her visual senses are in black and white. She's never seen a color before in her life. However, Mary is a brilliant scientist, so she has studied the eye's ability to take in color her entire life. So she knows everything. When an eye looks at the color red, she can tell you exactly what spectrum is going in, exactly what's going on in the biology of the eyeball, what's happening in your brain. She can talk you through the exact things that are happening in your body when your body sees red. However, she's never seen red before in her life, but she knows everything there is about what it would be like to see it other than seeing it herself. So then the question is about Mary's room is, if you take her out of the room and she sees a red apple, has she learned something? Or has she already known what that would be like because she was such an expert?
That's an interesting thought experiment, and I actually have not heard this one before. I'm going to have to go and say that she's learned something because the experience, and I'm a very experiential person. I think, reading and learning, or reading and audio and writing can get you so far. But I think actually being immersed and having all five senses utilized at one time to experience something. So like seeing the apple, you're using it in a completely different way. You're using a different sense than you've ever used before to see that apple. So you are learning something. You now know, you've now confirmed what you have learned about red, but she may even be surprised by the color red. So I think that's something too that like really ties into Charlottesville, is that you hear about, let's just say the Nazis and blank, 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 and blank. Those are all the descriptors of the Nazis. And you've never actually seen one in person. And now all of a sudden on these Vice pieces, you get to see that. And that experiential learning is kind of, okay, now you're confirming what you've learned about the Nazis.
Yeah. So you take the same opinion as me and a lot of people who listen to that thought experiment, which is, yeah, there's something that Mary has learned. But most people that disagree would say that she never knew everything because she had never had that experience. That's kind of a cop-out answer in my opinion. But so why this is brought up is normally to combat the idea of physicalism, which is in order to be real, there must be something physical that you see. There must be something physical that you can point back to. And so why this is so difficult for people to understand is she knows everything physical about it, but for some reason when she sees it, the experience kind of surpasses what it's like to be that physical aspect. Like there must be something metaphysical about us seeing, right? Like we can read all day about it. We can read everything, but that doesn't really match up to what it's like. And I'd have to agree with you, Josh. I think that she would see that apple and fucking shit herself. Like it'd probably be amazing. This for me like comes back to that idea, and it's hard for me to deal with. Like is we'll never be able to experience what another person has experienced. Like I'll never know what it was like to be one of those people in Charlottesville. I'll never know what it's like to not be myself from Chicago, the Chicagoland area. I really will never know. I can read up on that all day long. I can read up about these things. But there'll always be this metaphysical thing that I just don't have, and I guess for me it's like, well, knowing that, how do we go forward? I mean, because I don't think the response is that I can't comment on it. I think like I can't comment on racism because I've never experienced racism towards me, or like I think that's the left. A lot of people on the left say that, like, if this doesn't happen to you, you can't comment on this. I think that there's danger in that. But I think that is fair, that there's this like weird thing that if we've never experienced, this Mary's room is also commonly used for pain. So if you've never experienced this, pain, if you've never broken your arm and you're a doctor, you're never going to really know what it's like to break your arm until you've done it. You can look at x-rays all day, but you've never broken your arm. There's something beyond that you need to do. So for me, it becomes a question of how do we, in a, like Josh, you referenced, we're so political now. Like, that's true. We'll never escape Mary's room because I can't be someone else. But I don't think that makes it that I can't, comment on things. I think that means I should comment on more, but I just need to have that understanding. You know what I mean?
Well, and I think you just made the perfect argument for small and limited government. It's because, why you have never had the experience that I've had. So why should a government system be telling me how to live my life? And, and I think that's something that really needs to be thought about, is because, we now have more access to people than we've ever had. And actually my next question was going to be, as social media and just connectivity increases, do you think that that's going to increase the knowledge of other people's experiences, or is it almost information overload. It reminds me of a lyric, and I don't think I'm going to get it right, but "Wasting Time" by Jack Johnson, which is a really good song. And one of the lyrics, and like I said, I'm not going to get this right, but it's, we're too busy worrying about other people that we don't even know ourselves.
Yeah.
I think I have a real concern that that's something that is going to plague our generation and plague future generations, is that we're so concerned about what other people do that there's absolutely no, like, we don't know anything about ourselves.
Yeah, and it's, it brings up the question, like, was Mary better off for having studied all of that, or would she, like, did she know more about the experience, or really, like, would it have made no difference? Could she have just been a layman who had never knew anything about optics and then walked out and saw red, and it was such a big experience? And your question about social media, and like, we have so much information. I can read so much about what it's like to grow up in the South, what it's like to grow up in Oregon, but I'll never have that experience. I think that I don't think there's a black and white, like, we should talk about it, we shouldn't talk about it, we should do this, we shouldn't do that. I think that, though it's just a wasteful question, because at the end of the day, you've got to do something. I think it's just like, we need to recraft how we look at things. I think we have to craft, like, I've been taking much more recently. I think Josh, you share this, is that we need to look at more individual layers and saying, like, I don't know your experience, so maybe you should tell me about it, rather than trying to speak for others. But I think that it's, and I think that there's probably is good. Like, I think that, like, to take away the idea of, like, this being seeing, if it's experiencing someone else, I think it's probably good to read up on how their life is. I think it's good to experience it, but then it's not good to say you're an expert in it, because they're the only expert. And I think that's for everyone. Josh is the only expert of Josh. I'm the only expert of Bob. I think it's a mindset that we need to change, not the question, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and everybody wants to. I think it's another line in The Alchemist is, everyone knows how to live everybody else's life, but they don't know how to live their own life.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's such a perfect line, because I can make more criticisms of your life, Bob, and what you're doing wrong and how you should be living your life. And yet I'm not willing to take a look inwards and say, what am I doing wrong? And that is so hard, because asking questions of yourself, I mean, it was a difficult thing for me to do. And I had one of the most influential meetings I've ever had today with somebody who we just talked about how difficult it is for self-reflection. And one of the things that this is a guy who has been journaling for over 30 years. And I thought, holy cow, how cool is that? He can pull back to almost any date in the past 30 years and read about what his life was like at that time. And I was going to even say, for me, I just hit my first year of journaling on August 2nd, and just being able to kind of go back and say, hey, here is where I was at August 2nd and how much my life has changed in these questions. And, there's just little steps we need to take every day for self-reflection, because I think that is a skill that is really being lost. And I have an interesting question for you. And do you think it's a skill that's being lost because of a loss of religion in America? Because religion, and especially, Christian religion, I can't speak to Islam or any of the other religions, but especially, like, growing up in a Christian household, we were very much taught to have self-reflection because of looking at ourselves as, we are sinners and we're inherently sinful. And so we need to be self-reflective of all of our actions. And yet, without a kind of Christian, or at least a religious moral base, we don't have necessarily quite the same reason to look inward. Do you think that that's a problem? I mean, off the air, we were talking about Nietzsche and how he thought a godless society would kind of turn in on itself and kill itself. But
I think, so that's a loaded question in a good way. I think it's a great question. I think that we've talked about this probably before, but you got to look at, what does religion serve? And I think that universal thing that religion serves, when we lose that, is dangerous. I've been doing a lot more. Obviously, I grew up, I grew up Roman Catholic. Wouldn't say I'm a good Catholic now. Been doing a decent amount of reading into Buddhism. I find the tenements of Buddhism very interesting. But I think that the thing that you brought up, self-reflection, is the thing that religion provides so well. Community as well. But I think in what we're talking about now, I think that is something that if we lose is very dangerous. So like when I hear someone who talk about their Christian faith as them having a relationship with God, and they, every night they pray and they reflect on their day. I think, yeah, they're getting that really beneficial thing. If I talk to a Buddhist and they don't speak to a God, but they meditate on a daily basis, well, sure, they don't have the same belief system. Maybe they don't even have the same moral system, but I still think that they're getting that benefit of reflecting on themselves. But also, I think what religion does really well is make you not is reflect on your relationship to the world. Are you realizing your significance or lack thereof in the universe? I think that's very beneficial. So when we talk about the loss of religion, I think you could be a Christian and not be doing that. You could be a Buddhist and not be doing that. But I think if we lose that, I think that the country, the world, it suffers, undoubtedly. It's scary to think about what would come without that self-reflection, like realizing who are you, what are you here for, or just as simple as like, what did I like that happened in my day, what did I not like that happened in my day? If we lose that, what the hell, like, how do you move forward?
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing that I've learned throughout my internship. It's wrapping up on this Friday. I don't know when the podcast will come out, but the Friday the 18th will be my last day of the internship, and it's been one of the most challenging 12-week periods of my life. And kind of the one thing that I concluded from it, and I'd already known it kind of internally from just my previous experiences with life, but if you're like, no matter where I am with my professional development, no matter where I am in my social life, no matter where I am anywhere in life, am I making strides with personal growth to be to be the best version of Josh I can possibly be?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to do is look at myself every single day and say, this is what I did wrong. This is what I did right. I make a hell of a lot of mistakes. Don't get me wrong. I'm not even close to perfect, but I think even like admitting those mistakes to myself is a huge step in that process. But I also want to take this a little bit farther. And I think that something that, I don't know if it's due to the rise of kind of social media and technology, but I think we're losing what it means to be part of the human experience. Just like I was watching this, it was called, it's Geniuses of Modern History. It's on Netflix. It's a really, really interesting series. It's 3 episodes. It's about Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud. And I haven't watched the Freud one yet, but I watched the first 2. And just kind of, how much they thought about what it was like to be a human. And and then I just tried to think about what it's like to be a human and being a human in August of 2017, and that this is still with Charlottesville, with Donald Trump in office, with the brink of war with Korea. This is still the greatest time ever to be a human. And just, I could have been any other person, and yet I'm Josh. I could have been any other living organism, and yet I'm Josh. I mean, I know we're getting pretty deep here, but
well, and I think
just enjoying the human experience, we're losing out on that, I think, when we're sucked into our phones, and especially when we're sucked into other people's lives.
Yeah, and I think that something I've been talking to my good friend Jack here, who unfortunately is leaving New York tomorrow, so I'll be very alone in New York. So please come visit me. But what I was
I'm pretty sure that's a movie.
Alone in New York. But I think that's something. A second thing that's happening because of society, and it's gonna, I hate that it's happening because of society, but it's happening because of an increasingly selfish society. I think that self-reflection also can lead to this is the view, and I think I've fallen prey to this a lot too, is like the view that you're 100% unique, and that you're it's you against the world, and no one else understands you. You don't have a connection. There's this really great song by Fleet Foxes called "Helplessness Blues," and it's like I was raised up believing I was somehow unique, like a snowflake distinct among snowflakes, which I'm sure resonates with like people, people call them liberal snowflakes. But I think that there's danger in that thought, because I was thinking about it the other day. If you think about Yeah, I love the idea of self-sufficiency, and I love the idea of like not needing anyone. But if you look at like did it take for Josh? Josh, what did it take for your mind to become its mind? Well, first off, you started off with 23 chromosomes from each parent, right? So from the get-go, you were a product of someone else. And then beyond DNA, your mind was crafted. I mean, our frontal cortex amazingly doesn't really develop until we're 25 because it's so beneficial to develop that slowly over time from others. Really, if you think about it, we are products of each other. You know, me meeting Josh and me having this podcast with Josh, like undoubtedly I can probably look at the things about myself and say, this is where Josh affected me. These are the parts of Josh that I've adopted into myself, where Josh has pushed me into this thing. It's kind of amazing how connected we all are with each other. And I think that I'm not an expert in Buddhism, but I think that one of the tenets of Buddhism that I love is this, that we are all connected, that we're not just individuals, we're all extensions of each other. And I think that's a beautiful thought to think about, that we lose today when we think about, well, I got to post a picture of me on Instagram and I need to, like, it's all me, 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 me. How am I doing?
It's how are my likes doing? How am I,
Yeah.
how do other people see? I think we've talked about this before, but the most hilarious thing about social media to me is that we are letting other people decide how good our lives are.
Yes,
I went to the beach and didn't get as many likes as when I went to the mountains. I must be more of a mountain person.
Well, my favorite quote from Infinite Jest: "You'll become way less concerned with what other people think of you when you realize how seldom they do." I mean, if you walk into a bar, like, no one gives a shit about you, but for some reason we think about, like, oh, well, that person sees the stain on my shirt, so that's going to ruin my night. But it's, like, I think there's the thought that, like, you need to be this individual, like, separate from others. You don't need anyone else, but I think we're much more connected to that. I think that empathy is the beautiful thing that humans have that other species don't. And so, like, to just disconnect yourself from the rest of society is just, I think that's something we're losing on. I think that's something that religiosity teaches. I think that's a community aspect, is like, no, you're all brothers and sisters, is what they would say in the Christian church. But the Buddhism, well, we are all one. We are part of this being. We're literally, we created each other, and I'm happy for that. I'm happy I met Josh, and I'm happy that he taught me all the things he's taught me, and I'm sure it's the same back. Like, it is scary. I hope we don't lose that in in the modern age.
So how do we become individuals of one humanity, though? That seems like, I mean, that's, you don't answer that at all, but I'm just think that that's a big question that we need to really focus on. And especially I think the millennials need to focus on, is because we all want to be unique and we all want to be different. And yet we're unwilling to accept people when they are unique and different in ways that we don't want. Like, I use the Charlottesville reference, and I don't agree with either side, but, we kind of see that at its extreme of, I don't agree with somebody but yet I want everybody to be different and individual. How do we come to this compromise of living together as one when we're not allowing ourselves to accept people we disagree with?
Yeah, no, that's the $1 million fucking question, man. I mean, not to get, like, I've listened to some people who have studied Buddhism very, very extensively, which I don't think I'll ever do, that talk about they literally don't experience, they don't see it as, when they go in the world and face the world, they don't see it as like them being a person facing the world. They don't see it as like, oh, like Bob walked to the store today and Bob had an ice cream cone fall on him today, which is a weird thing that came to my mind. But they more see it as just like they're experiencing part of this huge collective. I mean, that's a pretty abstract thought that I don't know how I really apply to the modern world. I think that empathy is probably a part of it.
But is, like, we started off though, and I can never understand your experience, and you can never understand my experience.
Right.
Is empathy futile?
Yeah, no. See, that this is the issue of all that. I think that you gotta both be. You have to both understand. Like I said earlier, like language. It's a public tool for the understanding of private life. I still think self-reflection is probably the best thing. It's the only thing we can do. But then going out with when you're interacting with others, knowing that you don't understand their experiences, having to let them voice them, never making those assumptions, knowing that you're connected on this way and giving them. I think like maybe it's not, maybe it's just noting that they're as much of a person as you are. I think that we have the tendency to just always think we're the most significant one in the room and forget that that other person there is thinking about the same things. And they get up every day and they're just as significant as us. I think just having that mindset can be beneficial. I also have no idea. I mean, what do you think, Josh?
Something that comes to my mind is I was actually riding the Metro home today, and there was a torrential downpour here in St. Louis. And this was actually kind of a perfect example of what we're talking about right now. Some lady who was definitely homeless, definitely had been doing meth. I mean, she had scars all over her body. She had blisters and open wounds all over her body, came down and sat next to me. And I almost you get that like tense feeling in your spine of like discomfort and uncomfortability. And I had said a few words, and I actually conversed with her a little bit. And just even that, like, you totally let your guard down a little bit. Like, I kind of like, I felt like, I think it's probably similar to the same reaction that dogs have when their hair stands on end, is like someone that I don't know at all, that I've never experienced my entire life, is coming over and sitting a foot away from me. And how am I going to respond in this situation? Am I going to get up and walk away? Am I going to be rude and tell her to leave? Or am I going to open up myself to a new experience and a new person? And I'm never going to see this person again probably in my life. And yet I feel more fulfilled that I actually spent time and talked with her for 2 minutes. And it was just, dumb chit chat. But it was something that, hopefully that made her day feel better. And hopefully that made my day feel better. But
Right.
That was taking part of the human experience instead of being selfish and getting up and moving to a different spot.
Right. Just remembering that they're a human. I mean, it's so amazing. Being a human being is so unbelievably amazing. One of the other, I know we're running low on time, but one of the other thought experiments, not to get into consciousness, but this is something I obsess with. It's called, I think it's like the Chinese mind, and it's if every single person in China got together. Don't ask why it's China, but if every single person in China got together and simulated the neurons of a brain, like got into the exact formation of neurons of the brain and formulated that, that brain, would that group form a consciousness the same way that cells do?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think every person is so different that you can't.
Well, but then would
become one.
groupthink be like the form of consciousness? Like,
I mean,
is there
groupthink is obviously, take a look at the trend of this episode, but take a look at actual Nazi Germany. I mean, that was groupthink at its most evil. And yet there is good groupthink, but there's also dissent, and there's also people who probably thought that this was wrong but didn't feel like they had a voice to speak up. And I mean, I don't think it becomes consciousness. I don't think groupthink becomes collective consciousness.
Mm-hmm. And just to look at it, this as like a face value thing, that just shows how cool consciousness is, right? Like that cells, just literal cells, just atoms, they just form together and somehow create thoughts. And the question of, can we recreate that? I mean, where does the being start? Where does the soul sit? I mean, these are all these really cool questions about what it means to be human. And it's also cool because you start seeing how connected humanity is when we've talked about this before, but you look through like ideologies. I mean, the fact that like the Romantic period, most of America, in terms of writing and literature, we're thinking that same way. I mean, that's like another part of like group think. It's all so interesting. Humans are just so, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, right? But it really is amazing that these things that are allowing us to have this conversation exist, and we still have no idea how. Could we recreate these? I mean, obviously, I've been sitting and reading thought experiments all day, so obviously I can go on, for hours about this, but it's really amazing.
I I'll wrap up on a few things here, and I won't name names, but Bob, you were part of this experience with me, and we had one friend who actually ended up just crying because of just what it meant to be human, and
Yeah.
just like kind of we came to this conclusion of kind of took this conversation to its logical conclusion of just what it means to be you in this universe and in this place at this time, and just how powerful that is, how unbelievably powerful that is. And then I would also say something cool that I've been working on, that you don't have to do this program, but I think doing something similar. I've been on, like I said, you've probably, as I've said on the podcast, this Jordan Peterson kick. He's got this whole program called self-authoring, and it's past, present, and future. So you take a look at kind of like your past, your present, and your future, and you very detailed. But I think it'd be cool, if some listeners out there are interested, just take a look back at your past and as detailed as you can year by year, and just figure out what experiences and what people you met along the way that shaped who you are. And I think that that's just a great first step in understanding who you are. I think once we understand ourselves more, we can understand the world more, and then have a better world. And obviously that's not a foolproof answer, and I'm no Dr. Phil, but if I were to make my armchair psychologist impression, I think once we know ourselves, we can know other people. I mean, that's like, what do they say about relationships? You can't love somebody else until you love yourself. I think that's the same thing about experiencing the world. You can't experience and understand the world until you've experienced and understood yourself.
No, totally. And I talk a lot about on the podcast, but also in person, a lot about like how we're all so insignificant. Now I find so much beauty in that, how we're all part of this collective. We're all working towards this thing that is humanity, and how cool that is that you're a piece of this puzzle that's pushing this wonderful thing called humanity forward. I see so much strength in that. You talked about how like just thinking about what it is to be human, and if we start thinking about like the theories of this being a multiverse, and there being an infinite amount of Bobs and Joshes having this conversation, but there's only one you and me here. It's easy to get afraid and see that as a negative, but I see it as such a cool positive, that you have such a gift. You just got to live. And obviously, we're 22 years old. I've a very rudimentary reading understanding of these philosophers that I've quoted today and these thought experiments. And I'm sure I skipped a bunch of things.
Just a rudimentary understanding of the experience of humanity.
Yeah. Oh,
22
totally.
years. I mean, think about, let's have this conversation again when we're 5 years from now, and see how much that changed. But even like
when
27,
we're 80.
when we're 80. Hopefully, by the time we'll be episode million. We're going for a million.
We're shooting for the gold. Yeah.
But I will say maybe episode 37 did save the world. I'm not saying it did. I'm saying maybe it did, but share this with your friends.
Yeah, no, this was really fun. I hope that if anyone listening knows more thought experiments, please send them our way. I think this was so interesting to talk about, and giving those concrete examples.
Please send us feedback. That's something we have been looking for a lot more on this podcast. Is we're kind of, we're really starting to get in a groove. We're really starting to get into a role with listens, and we want to be more engaged with the listeners and with the followers. And I've been pretty slacking on the Facebook page and Twitter.
Follow us on Instagram.
Yeah, but
Instagram's been hot.
Instagram is kind of the main hub, with Facebook and Twitter occasionally. But follow us on all those platforms. Please engage with us. We really want you to. We want, was this an interesting episode for you? Do you want us to go back to just news of the week? Did you want us to spend a whole episode on Charlottesville? Just give us your reaction. We want insight from the fans, because this is a show that, we do somewhat selfishly, because we bring on guests that we want to hear from, but we also want to make content that you guys want to hear. And so please, please, please give us feedback.
Yeah.
And ditto again. I've got the right words tonight. It's unbelievable. I've got the best words. I know the best people. This is going to be a huge podcast.
Yeah.
And like I said, maybe we'll get Anthony Bourdain before episode 1,000,000, and our, in the bylaws of Entitled to My Friend's Opinion, the Anthony Bourdain episode will be the last episode we do. So if you're sick and tired of hearing our voices, and Anthony Bourdain, send him our way. So thank you so much, you guys. You are a great audience, great entitled family members, I would love to meet all of you. We are thinking about, hopefully when the base gets a little bit larger, doing an entitled family takeover somewhere. So maybe we'll go do a social event or something, probably in St. Louis right now. But we'll look at that, or Tokyo. To the Japanese listeners, that'd be cool. Do a flight out to Tokyo. But just lots of things in the works, and we want you guys to be part of it. I mean, you're here as the early listeners. You can be like, hey, I was one of the first 100, 200 listeners. So I don't want to ramble on much longer, but thank you guys again so much. Please let us know about this episode, and we look forward to making more content and trying to give you a better episode every single time. So with that, best of luck, enjoy the world, and remember, it's going to be a little bit better tomorrow than it was yesterday. Goodbye.